Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Mark G. Richardson's Proven Time Management Strategy for the Home Improvement Business, or for home improvement contractors. I'm really excited to be your host today. My name is Michelle Letman, and I also have Steve, who is here and will be helping out answering any of the questions throughout the webinar. I want to ask everyone here in the audience a question. What is your biggest struggle when it comes to managing your time? If you want, you can communicate and put that into our into the chat box, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you have any other questions throughout the webinar, you can put those right into there. Today, we have Mark G. Richardson, leading authority in the remodeling industry and author of 3 books. He has a wonderful presentation for you all today. So with that, I will pass it on over to Mark. Mark, you can take it away.
Great. Thank you, Michelle, and welcome, everyone. It's good that you're able to carve out a little bit of time to focus on time. And I hope at least that this not only will share some insights, but within a day or two, those that grab a hold of some of the concepts will actually get their hour that they're investing back. You know, there's really 3, I think, primary things that we want to get into today in terms of the agenda. The first is we're going to spend some time thinking about and trying to better understand time. And if you really think about it, we all know what time is, but what does it look like, smell like, feel like? Well, we can't touch it, we can't feel it, and therefore it exists for everybody. So we're going to spend some time trying at least to get our head around just the whole subject of time. The second is I'm going to give you some exercises that we're going to go through to take inventory of your time. You know, an inventory is just like, you know, taking some inventory in your office or your home. You got to kind of organize and sort of understand your time if, in fact, you want to improve it. And then lastly, and this is probably the crown jewel of what we're going to be getting into today, is a time mastery system. And this time mastery system was actually developed about 25 years ago and has been taught to literally thousands of people. And I will say that while the system is relatively simple to be able to use, it really is potentially life-changing in terms of accomplishing a lot more things for you. My friends here at Surefire also are going to give you a book if you want to follow up with them, or you can certainly purchase the book yourself through Amazon or any of the normal sources. And the book really, I think, gets into a lot more depth about the themes and the issues that we're talking about today. So I want to start with, like I do with a lot of things that I speak about, is take a look at how things have changed. You know, because we have a tendency to kind of live in the day-to-day, but not really looking at a snapshot of how things have changed. So let's take a look at 10 years ago versus today. So 10 years ago, if you really think about it, it wasn't that long ago, while technology was certainly an integral part of what many people were doing, it really was optional. I mean, you could have a stubby pencil and a pad of paper, and you could really do what you needed to do in terms of technology. However, there's a dependence on technology now, and I think it's really changed, not only the speed at which things are, but also how we interact with the subject of time. 10 years ago, time would build value. Now, what do I mean by that? For those involved in the home improvement business, you know, we would let a client know in terms of scheduling. We'll be out to their home in 5 to 7 days. Or once we go out and look at their home, we're back to them within a week or 10 days in terms of a proposal. From the client's perspective, that was actually not a negative thing. That built value. It built value in that you were going out and kind of putting in hard work on their behalf. Today, however, time is not on your side. It's just the opposite. People expect, I think, speed today, and they oftentimes will jump off and work with someone else just because you are not acting and reacting as quickly. 10 years ago, we used to ask a person, you know, whether it's at a restaurant or bar or friends, you know, what do you do with your free time? Matter of fact, oftentimes in interviews, that's a fairly common question. Well, you don't hear that question very often because time is not free anymore. There's different kind of things we may do with our time, but we certainly don't think of it as free. 10 years ago, we'd return phone calls in the next day. Someone would call. Usually kind of the rule of thumb is you want to make sure you call them back within the next day. However, today, I think the expectation on many people is the call gets returned within an hour. Just think about the speed and how that's changed. 10 years ago, we used to talk about office hours. If you go back 30 years ago, you used to talk about banker's hours. But even 10 years ago, what are the office hours? Today, 24/7. Now, I'm not advocating that people need to work 24/7, but there needs to be today there's an edge of accessibility that is 24/7 that's very different from the past. 10 years ago, we had 24 hours in a day, and what do we have now? The same, 24 hours in a day. So while things have dramatically changed in terms of technology, in terms of speed, in terms of being kind of overwhelmed and stressed and having to react very quickly and having accessibility 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. However, we still have been dealt with the same amount of time. And that's really what I think has created a lot of the stress that oftentimes people need a system that we'll talk about a little later to be successful. So there's 7 steps to time mastery. And I'm a big believer, just like process in terms of baking cookies or sales process or whatever it happens to be, there's certain steps to the process, just like there is with remodeling. So the same thing holds true when it comes to time mastery. So the first step that we're going to be talking about is understanding it, understanding the subject. Step 2 is establishing the why. Having strong whys, if you want to change, is really critical. There's a reason oftentimes that people don't accomplish New Year's resolutions, and it's not because they're bad ideas. They didn't have a strong enough reason or why to ultimately change. Step 3 is taking inventory of your time. As I said earlier, this is a process that I'm going to give you a few tips of how to do it, but I encourage for those of you listening to this particular webinar, do take some extra time to take some inventory because the numbers don't lie. If in fact you can take some inventory of what they are. Step 4 is you want to develop some skills. Time mastery is a skill more than it is an art. So you want to sharpen your axe and develop some skills. I'm going to talk about a few of those things. And then we're going to get into a system itself. This system is a tool. It's a tool that anybody can do if they just practice it. It doesn't require high level of intellect. It just requires some discipline and practice. Then we're going to talk about just some ways to avoid the potholes and mistakes. And then lastly, I'm going to just give you a couple tips for those that are at maybe a little bit higher level of a black belt when it comes to time, is how to think about taking it to the next level. So let's talk about understanding time. What I oftentimes do, whatever the subject is, whether it's about time or whether it's about sales or whether it's about the environment, I oftentimes like to seek out, I think, other things that wise people have said about time. Ben Franklin, who has a boatload of many different really fine quotes, he said time is money. Now, when I'm speaking to different groups, they oftentimes think, oh, yeah, that's the value of my time can translate into money. And that is true. However, even more importantly than that, I think what Ben Franklin was saying is if you can make time meaningful, if you can translate it into something that you can touch and feel, then it becomes more meaningful to you. Another quote I like is, work expands to fill the time available for its completion. You think about this when it comes to a lot of the different activities that you do. If you go to the grocery store, for example, and you give yourself an hour to ramble around and do a little taste test, do different kind of things, you're probably going to fill up the hour. On the other hand, if you give yourself 20 minutes to go in and do probably a very similar function, you're going to do it in 20 minutes. So part of the time mastery system we're going to get into is starting to determine up front the amount of time certain things should take and that you want to allocate for them. Then the next quote, which is one of my favorite quotes, and it really is going to tie into so many things I'll talk about today, and that is, plan your work for today and every day, then work your plan. Every single one of the words in this simple quote are important. It all starts with a plan. So plan your work for today, not for tomorrow, but for today. and do it every day, because the way to get masterful at it is do something the same way every time, then you work the plan. For those involved in home improvement, you wouldn't just literally send out a bunch of materials without a simple kind of game plan, whether it's a flow chart or whether it's a blueprint of what you want to do. And you need to just treat yourself with the same degree of importance and reverence that you do your projects, and I think it'll make sense. So let's talk about translating time. When you're translating time, I think one way to do this is by thinking about time in terms of something else you can accomplish in that amount of time. For example, 1 hour for some might mean it's a 6-mile run, or it might equate to a certain amount of money. So as you're thinking about how much time certain things are taking or where you can save time or waste time, just by picking up a simple hour, you're going to see some benefits. 2 hours might be watching a movie, or might be a certain amount of money, or it might be going out on a date. Whatever it happens to be, that amount of time is equal to that activity. 3 hours, if you're in Washington, D.C., might be driving to the beach, or again, it might be a certain amount of money. In 4 hours, you can fly from California to Washington, D.C. In 4 hours, you can do that. So as I really talk about these different things that you'll be able to save time, when you start to add up all the time and the savings, the returns are quite large. In 8 hours, you might build a small deck. But the most important, I think, question in all of this is, what do each one of these intervals of time mean to you? So as an exercise, I encourage you to write down 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, and 8 hours, and then write down some different activities it means to you. And what will happen is you start to think about and compare the amount of time vis-a-vis the activity. You're creating value to the time, and you're translating in terms of something meaningful. So let's talk about this for you. If you take this simple exercise and you fill this out for yourself, I think you're going to benefit. Okay. The next thing we want to talk about is the value of saving time. Now, a lot of people don't really fully appreciate this, but if you can just find ways to save 10 minutes a day, that's 3,650 minutes a year. That's 61 hours a year. Think about that. Just by tweaking certain things or not wasting 10 minutes a day. Now you can move this to 30 minutes a day. That's 183 hours in a year. Now, this may sound to you somewhat mechanical, but the reality is the difference between the most successful and the moderately successful is not necessarily the intellect, and it's not necessarily the hard work. It's about how they are using their time. 60 minutes equals over 20,000 minutes in a year, or 360 hours. Now, the real question in all this is, what do you do with this extra time? If I gave you a gift of 100 hours a year, what would you do with that extra time? What would you do with 200 hours a year? What would you do with 300 hours a year? And when you start to think about it, well, 100 hours a year, that's equivalent to like a week's vacation or a couple weeks of vacation. What would I do with that amount of time? What you're doing is you're starting to make it more, the time itself, more important to you. Make it concrete and make it meaningful. Another theme that's quite important is the whole notion of being effective versus being efficient. See, I think one of the negative things about technology today, and it's even a generational thing, I think we're focused on very much the efficiencies, not necessarily the effectiveness. We want to focus on being effective. And when you think about this, being efficient is doing things with the least resources in the shortest amount of time. It's all about the shortest amount of time. However, being effective is accomplishing the desired goal or outcome in the best or the most effective way. And those are really very different but very important themes. Of course, you want to try to be efficient, but more importantly, you want to be effective. For example, is it faster to send somebody a text versus picking up the phone and calling them? Of course, it's faster to send them a text, but did that accomplish the goal, the desired goal? Is it better to shoot out a lengthy email or to send them a handwritten note that's communicating something very similar? You have to ask yourself, what's the most effective way to do this, and then create a plan to execute that. So why is being in control of your day important? As I said before, you need to start with really strong whys. And when I ask audiences all the time this question, usually people have one or two whys that it's important to be in control, and they will say that's enough. I would argue it's much better to have multiple reasons why. Then you will have the discipline to change, and especially when in the tougher times when you need to learn a new system. So why is it? It might be because you just want to reduce stress. You want to reduce the overwhelm. The reality is, and Harvard actually did an interesting study in home improvement, where in a recent 3-year period of time, more product has been developed for home improvement than the last 100 years. That's created a level of stress and overwhelm, I think, for everybody. That stress is also a product of the speed at which things are happening. It might be that you want to accomplish more. You might have a bucket list or a laundry list of things that you want to accomplish. You just say to yourself, I just don't have enough time to do these. It might be you want to invest more time into yourself, whether it's personal improvement or whether professional improvement. Well, where are you going to find the time to do that unless you make controlling your day important? You want to keep promises. Think about the number of times that you actually break a promise, whether it's to a family member or a professional colleague, that you really feel pretty bad about. You really feel, gosh, I made this promise and I just didn't do it. I was a little bit out of control in terms of my day and my time. Exceeding the expectations. One of I think the things that most successful do is they oftentimes are focused on, how do I exceed the expectation by 1 or 2%? Well, if you have more control of your day, you'll be able to do that. You can think more clearly. Think about the times that you're just reacting. You're not really thinking things through. You have an edge. You have impatience about things. A lot of times that's because you're not in control of your day. You can also achieve your medium and long-term goals. Now, one of the interesting things that's happened in the last 10 years especially is that so much of our time is spent just on the short term, on that day's activities. It's not reflecting. It's not thinking about. It's not going into deeper thought when it comes to medium and the longer term goals. But by being in control of your day, you will be able to carve out that time to have that deeper thought and think more about the future. But at the end of the day, the bottom line with all this is you just want to feel better. You want to feel better. You want to feel more fulfilled. You don't want to come home and be irritable and impatient, certainly. That's really what being in control is about. Yes, of course, it's about the tangible things in terms of accomplishing more and keeping promise and expectations. But, all these are a formula to add up to make you feel better and more fulfilled. So let's go ahead and take some inventory. So as we're moving through this process, we've talked a little bit about kind of trying to, put some fun or some spin into what is this stuff called time. We talked about a little bit more of the why, but now let's take some inventory. It's important to look in the mirror and take some inventory if you're ever going to want to really improve. So one of the areas that I usually begin with when I'm working with folks on the subject of time is thinking about the proactive versus reactive time. Oftentimes when I'm speaking to groups, whether in sales or in production, and I'll have them really ask themselves this question about proactive versus reactive time, and that is, how much of your day is reactive that others control versus proactive? And what I want you to do is to think about that subject. Write down right now what percentage of your day is reactive versus proactive. Reactive being you're not in control, and proactive that you feel you're being in control. Now, needless to say, these numbers need to add up to 100%, but the reality is, as human beings, there's always going to be some reactive time. However, the most successful I've found in studying this over the last 20 years is somewhere between 80 and 85% proactive versus reactive. And when you think about that, if your numbers are 50-50, then there's some room for improvement. So there's really a few sources of this reactive activity, reactive time that's out there. The first is your clients. Most home improvement contractors have a series of clients. They have prospects, that they haven't necessarily started projects yet. They have projects under construction, and then they have projects that have just wrapped up in the early stages of like punch list and warranty type items. So what I would encourage you to do is Monday morning, or you could even do this tomorrow morning, is make a list of those clients. Most people have somewhere between 5 and 15 clients. Make a list of what those clients are and proactively communicate to every one of them. It could be a voicemail, it could be a text, it could be an email. And what you want to do is you want to reach out professionally to them, let them know that you're thinking about them, and let them know that you have time available if in fact they have an issue, and set a specific time during the week that you can address their challenges or issues or questions. And if you do that with them, of those, let's say 10, 3 or 4 of them are going to say, okay, and set a time with you. 3 or 4 of them are going to say, I'm going to react whenever I'm going to do. So you're not going to really solve them. And then there's 3 or 4 of them that are just going to be happy that you're staying in touch and being professional. So what you're going to start to do by this simple little activity is start to shift some of this reactive time that you don't know when it's going to happen over to proactive, and you're going to be in more control. The same is also true when it comes to your team members or your coworkers. Your team members interrupt you. Could be alliances, could be team members. So what you want to do with them is when you get interrupted, when you're focused or kind of in the zone, immediately ask them, is it okay to set a time to deal with their question or issue? Don't drop everything and just deal with it. You're not in control then. So by setting a time, you're going to be able to not only think more clearly and have, I think, be more pleasant in the conversation, but you're also going to be able to control the proactiveness even more. And the third source, which the same kind of techniques holds true, happens with your family as well. You just have to control it rather than have them control you. So again, the goal here is to get baby steps to start to shift some of this reactivity over to proactiveness. And it's one of the foundational elements if you ever do want to fully have control of your day, is you've got to shift this blend of reactive and proactive time. So a few proactive tips, kind of in summary on this piece. One of them is take the inventory. So if you don't know what that percentage is, then why don't you just take some time every day and ask yourself, based on the plan, how much of it was reactive versus. Don't fly blind, and that way you'll be more successful. The second is try to improve in baby steps. Don't try to shift. If you're 50-50, to move it to 80-20. Move it to 55-45. Move it to 60-40. Take the baby steps that I'm suggesting here, and you'll start to feel a little bit better every single day. The third is establish the time allowed, then do it. In the planning system I'm going to give you, that's the way the system works. You are establishing how much time that you have available for this task, then you do it. You don't do the task, you set the time that's allowed for it. Set appointments with people. Do not react or get interrupted. Say no. The reality is, saying no is not necessarily a bad thing. It's not a bad thing for you or the person you're saying no, but just do it with some kindness and consideration. And I would say by just saying no occasionally, you're going to be more successful. And then lastly, going back to the Norman Vincent Peale quote, plan your work for today every day, then work your plan. That's a great way to be proactive if you have a plan, and then all you need to do is follow the plan. So looking at time, again, in the spirit of our taking inventory a little bit more here, another way to look at it is think about the different activities or categories of your time that you have. And I'm going to give you a little example of that, but it starts with what percentage of your time do you spend in each of these categories? And then what you want to do is say, okay, if I had a blank slate, what would be ideal percentages that I would want to be? Now, let's assume for the moment that the activities are the constant. What the variable is the amount of time that you spend in each one of these. And then it becomes, okay, how do I start to shift from what is actual today to what is ideal? So let me give you an example of this. This was actually with a group of salespeople, and it's looking at the different activity that the salespeople are involved in. They have sales appointments. You can see on the chart on the left, sales appointments. They have a little bit of marketing activity. They have training of themselves. They have the project work of what they've sold. Then they have some internal meetings, and then they have some site visits, and then they have some administrative kind of tasks. So all of those in this case were kind of the activities for the typical salespeople. So in this case, with a 45-hour work week, which I know for many might be a little bit light, but for a 45-hour work week, it was determined that about 10 hours a week was in the sales appointment, 6 hours was spent marketing, an hour in training, and so on. Now, I always like to translate these into percentages. The percentages help to give you a little bit more perspective. It's almost like looking at a pie chart. It helps you to kind of feel the blend a little bit. Now, the next exercise you want to do is say to yourself, okay, if I want to just adjust some of these and see what it might look like, still with the same 45-hour week, what might it be? Well, in this case, I'd like to get a little bit more time, maybe one more appointment a week. So I'm going to move that to 12 hours for sales appointments. To get the one more appointment a week, I need to spend a little bit more time on marketing. I also need to be more skilled at what I'm doing, so I'm going to invest 2 more hours a week in training and improving myself. And on the project work, I think that's going to take me about the same length. I can always look for more improvement on that later. The meetings, I'm going to try to squeak them down. Rather than 1-hour meetings, I'm going to try to squeeze them into 30-minute meetings. Rather than a 30-minute meeting, I'm going to try to do it in 20 minutes. So I'm going to just be disciplined to try to squeeze my meetings down to pick up only an hour a week. Site visits, I'm going to try to leverage technology a little bit more and try to reduce the amount of time sitting in traffic and going on site visits. And on the administrative activities, I think just by being a little bit more efficient, I'm going to improve that. Now, what's interesting in all this, when you actually do this as a salesperson in particular, and this holds true whether you're in sales or leadership or whether you're in production, but as a salesperson, what this resulted in is this group of people potentially giving themselves about a 30% raise by focusing more of their time on the things that they could see the best returns and make the most money on. And that was really the sales appointments and certainly the marketing activities. And it was reducing some of the others. So it doesn't take major shifts to see dramatic improvement, but you got to take the inventory first. So that's really what this exercise is about. So I'm going to turn it over to Michelle, and I'll be back to you shortly.
Thank you so much, Mark. So I think this is a good time to take a quick water break, and we want to ask if you would like a copy of Mark's book, Control Your Day Before It Controls You, The 7 Steps to Mastering Your Time. And we ask if you request this book that you do it in exchange for a brief conversation about your digital marketing with Surefire. So the poll is now open, and you can select either Tuesday or Thursday of next week. If neither of those times work for you, just select please email me and to pick a time, and we will help pick out the best time that works for you. So take a second here to fill that out, and then we will let Mark get back to his presentation. And like I mentioned earlier, if you have any questions, feel free to throw those into the chat box, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. We want to hear from you guys. All right, the poll is now closed, and Mark, back to you.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. And again, much of the stuff I'm talking about today is really encapsulated in the book, but it's brought into the book with a lot more stories and insights and examples. And I think by reading some of those stories and examples, it really does help you, I think, to make some of the concepts a little bit more sticky, and they will be more successful for you. So the next piece of our process here is developing a system. Now, just like in baking cookies, there's a process that you go through. You know, you might have a yearning for those cookies, but the first thing you need to do is you need to pull out that recipe. And in looking at the recipe, you want to take a little bit of inventory of what materials do you have. Those materials then that you don't have, you make a list and you go to the store to get those ingredients. Now, you want to make sure you get the right ingredients, and then you come back and you start to set up the process to mix the materials, but then also preheat the oven. Once you've done that, you put it in an oven, you have the exact amount of time, then you're going to get a predictable outcome. Now, I use that kind of simple, almost patronizing example because any system like that is to create a predictable outcome. If you want to have a predictable outcome in your day, you're feeling the stress, you're feeling overwhelmed, you're feeling that you're not accomplishing what you want, by developing a system and a blueprint to be able to do it, you'll be able to be more successful. So here's the process involved. First of all, we're going to start and talk about step one being the setup. We're going to do a brain dump, which is kind of a to-do list. Now, most of the time when I'm speaking to audiences about this, I ask them, how many of you create to-do lists for yourself? Well, most of the people create to-do lists. Now, most people, however, start their day with the to-do list, but then they launch the to-do list without a plan. As you'll see, there are many other steps beyond this. You've got to reflect and think about your to-do list. You've got to put proper time and how long the different things are going to take. You've got to set up a timeline and make it more visual to create a plan. You've got to analyze it and say to yourself, is this really going to fit the timeline and all these activities? Or am I just wishful thinking? You've got to block out the actual events and meetings within this timeline. You've got to incorporate and hook them together. You've got to then launch your plan. And then you've got to monitor. Monitoring is one of the most important elements that we'll talk about as we get into this. It's sort of like, a pilot flying a plane across the United States. He monitors that flight literally hundreds of times with air traffic control, weather, headwinds or tailwinds in terms of the flight, so actually can make the adjustments and get to the destination safely. This process is designed to do very similar. If you monitor it along the way and you have to tweak it, that's what you have to do to get to the destination successfully. So what I'm going to do is actually take you through an example of this, not just a lot of words and steps, but I'm going to take you through each one. And I'm going to talk first about step one, and that's preparation. But there's a framework for the first 30 days for those that want to use this particular system. And we say 30 days because that's really the level of commitment it takes to develop a habit. This is actually, the habit is the routine. It's almost like, if you want to get out and exercise or you want to get out and run, whatever it happens to be, you have to do that a certain period of time before you start to see the benefits of it. What most people find is if they can get into a system like this, after the first week, they start to see some real benefits. But it's going to take probably a good solid 30 days to create it as a habit for you. So again, the first week is always tough in anything new. Just know it's going to be tough. Follow the techniques I'm giving you 100%. You've got to invest a minimum of 30 minutes a day, and that's got to be in the morning. Now, many people say, I don't have 30 minutes a day, but here's, I think, the gift that's going to come back to you. After literally a couple of weeks, that 30 minutes, I'm going to give you a dividend back of an hour a day. Now, you think back to that earlier chart. What does that extra 30-minute dividend give me in the course of a whole year? You're literally getting hundreds of hours back in the whole year. It's really worth the amount of time to be committed that extra 30 minutes a day. Here's another one that's really important. When you think about your life today more than ever, include the personal and the professional activities. I'm not saying you plan all the way up till you go to bed at night. What I am saying is if you have personal activities you're having to do during the day, weave that into your plan. Try to be disciplined but not obsessed by this system. One of my earlier students decided that, his family needed to be taught this system, so he had Saturday morning classes for them. Don't do that. This is for you. This is for you to get better. It's not necessarily for you to get obsessed by the system. So in the first 30 days, these are a few tips that you want to try to be able to do. So let's dive into the setup. Now, setup, first of all, it happens in the morning. Something mysteriously happens overnight, so doing it the night before really makes a very flawed plan. So the first thing that you want to do is find a quiet place. Now, I've coached different individuals on this. Your office may not be the quietest place. You might need to find a conference room, or you might even need to sit in a corner of a restaurant or find a place at your home to do this in a quiet place. You need to concentrate. You need to focus for at least this 30 minutes to create a successful plan. Start the plan at least the 60 minutes before the first scheduled activity. So if you have a meeting, let's say, that's starting at 9 o'clock, you want to make sure you're sitting down at least by 8 o'clock so you can devote that 30 minutes before that first scheduled activity. Try to find consistent places, but you do need to adjust the environment depending on what you do. Some people travel, some people have early meetings, some people have no meetings in the morning, but they have meetings, outside the office a little later. So just find a consistent place if you can to do it. Oftentimes this might be at your home or it might be at your office, but ideally the consistent place does help you. Have all of your data, your notes, your tools, your computer in front of you. You don't want to have a flawed plan. You want to have all the information in front of you, just like in remodeling, having all the information in front of you so you can properly assemble and organize this plan for yourself. Turn off your cell phone. Don't worry, you'll be able to call someone back in 30 minutes. So turn off your cell phone so you can really focus on this. And if you do it really early in the morning, you're probably not going to miss any calls anyway. Now you're ready to plan. So again, the setup is really important. I was working with someone who got interruptions in his setup and ended up with a very flawed plan. So you really have to be focused on these steps that I'm talking about. So I'm going to walk you through a typical day of what you need to do. Now, you need to have a notebook. 8.5 by 11 is the size it needs to be. And it needs to be a spiral notebook. And on the top of this notebook page, and all this is in the book, the details of how to do this, on the top of the page, you need to put the date. But I also like and encourage folks that want to do this to put in a theme for the day. That theme, I think, creates a little bit more alignment, a little bit more direction. It's not essential for your day, but I find those that have a little bit more of a theme for that day, I think are a little bit more targeted and a little bit more focused. So in this particular day, which was September 6th, 2016, which was a Wednesday, the theme for this particular day, written on the top of the sheet, the top of the spiral notebook, was balance. So the first thing you want to do is you want to do a brain dump. Now, brain dump that word is just the way it's intended. You want to write things down as fast as you can, looking at your calendar, thinking about what you want to accomplish that particular day. You want to abbreviate when you need to, and you want to keep going until there's nothing else there. I'm oftentimes asked, when do you know that the brain dump is over? Well, when there's nothing else there. That day, the focus is that day. Plan your work for today. This is not things that come up on future days. When you think about those things in your brain dump, you want to write those down in your calendar for future days or on a separate piece of paper that you can organize that particular day. So the next thing that you want to do is what I call timeout. You want to get up, you want to go to the restroom, you want to go to the coffee machine, you want to walk out, get a fresh air, literally spend 2 or 3 minutes, it's not that long, to go out and ask yourself, is there anything else I'd like to accomplish today? Is there anything else I'd like to move forward in terms of medium and long-term goals that, really would help to make a good day? In this particular day, I had a new training concept that I wanted to scribble some ideas for, as well as set a lunch with my godfather that I hadn't seen for quite a while. So now I have all my activities, my to-do list, and then I have my reactive time that I'll talk about in a minute what that needs to be. And then I have those reflective kind of things. Now, reactive time, like we did the exercise before, proactive and reactive, everyone has reactive time. So in your notes, you want to allow the right amount of time for reactive time. Now, what I encourage is everyone start with 120 minutes a day of reactive time. Now, after a couple of weeks, if in fact you're getting things done with extra time, you can reduce that reactive time to a lower number. As an example, which I'm a pretty busy guy, I allow 40 minutes of reactive time every day. But I encourage everyone starting this process to allow 120 minutes of reactive time. The next thing you want to do, and all I have, again, I've got a long to-do list just like you, is I want to attach time to each one of these. So the next thing I literally do is I write down the number of minutes that each one of these things will take. And I know this sounds a little bit obsessed for some of you, but this really does work. So now I've added up, or I've got all the minutes. As I said before, you see the 120 minutes of reactive time, but I've just guessed, I've estimated. Don't labor over these things, just guess. And what you want to do when you're guessing is you want to be not too conservative, not too liberal. For example, calling someone for a quick call, minimum I would put in is 5 minutes. My meetings usually have a beginning and end to them. So the meeting with Smith, for example, was an 80-minute meeting, or the meeting with Jim S. was a 60-minute meeting. So in those cases, those are meetings that were already established. So I've determined the amount of time. Then I want to do something pretty simple. Don't need even a calculator. Just add them all up. Add them all up, divide by 60, and that gives me my total amount of time all the brain dump activities will take, which was 11.25 hours. Now, the next thing you want to do is set up a timeline. And the timeline is literally just this. Do not have a template for a timeline. Start a new timeline every single day, because for most people, every day is a little bit different. Now, the timeline is going to have a beginning and it's going to have an end, and then it's going to have points during the day based on the beginning and end of certain activities. So I set up a timeline. The next thing I want to do is put times in there based on the activities and the events. So in this case, I'm sitting down doing my planning at 6:30, and I'm going to be done by 7, so I want to have my timeline start really at 7. Then in this case, I wanted to establish an end to my day at 6. I didn't let it go loosey-goosey on beyond that point. The next thing you want to do is block out the letters for each one of these blocks of time. Block out the events. So you see between 8:30 and 10, those happen to be meetings, and from 2 to 3. So I wanted to visually block it out. So now I can visually look at this timeline. It literally is like a diagram in front of me that now I need to incorporate the activities into the timeline. So what I need to do is hook the to-do list into this timeline. So it's really simple. All I do is put the letters that correspond to when I wanted to accomplish that during the day. So as you can see, and taking it all the way down, and of course reactive doesn't have a letter because we don't know when it's going to be, otherwise it wouldn't be reactive. The next thing I want to do is do some analysis. So I want to add up all the A's, and I want to add up all the B's and all the C's, and then write it on the timeline so I can do some analysis to say, does this to-do list brain dump, this plan, does this fit the time available in each of these slots? As you can see, from 7 to 8:30, that's 90 minutes. All the A's added up to 80, therefore I knew that it would work. 8:30 to 10, that was the meeting time, 90 minutes, that works, and so on and so on. So I can also see 7 o'clock to 6 o'clock is about 11 hours, and my total amount of time adds up to 11 hours. So now what I've got is the ability to have a good solid plan. Now, most people when they're doing this, and the reason it takes 30 minutes as opposed to 15 or 20 minutes, is that most people when doing this, it takes some time to work this, to really analyze this. And you have to go back and make some adjustments and tweaks to the plan. No different than when you're building a remodeling project. The next thing you want to do, now I don't even need to think about anything but just launching the A's. That's my only focus, is launching the A's. So then I literally want to do that. I want to set some meetings with those initials up front. I want to do the Miller contract review, and I wanted to set up or check with a schedule for the radio station. In this case, I had a radio show that I was doing. I needed to check some scheduling there. So I wanted to do just the A's in this case, and then what you do is you monitor. You circle the letters as you're going down. Try not to cross them all out, because you'll find that this is a real blueprint and plan for the future. So that's really the setup for what we're talking about. Now, what I'm going to do real quickly for you, because we have time, I'm going to go back to the beginning here, and I'm going to take you kind of a speed date through this process. But again, all this information is in the book, and for those of you that would like, you can contact my friends here at Surefire, and I'm sure they'd be glad to send you the slides as well. So I'll just real quickly run through it. It starts with a date and the theme of the day. Then I want to do my brain dump all the way down, all the way down, all the way down until there's nothing left. Then I have my reactive time. I want to take time out and reflect and add a couple more things. The next thing I want to do is attach time to these. Add up all the time. Does it work with the time available for that particular day? Then I want to set up my timeline, and I want to block out the things within my timeline during that day. So the things that are meeting, I scratch out so I can see those things. Now I want to connect the dots together between the timeline and the activities. Next thing I need to do is analyze it, add up all the A's, all the B's, all the C's, and transfer them and ask myself, does it fit within that? Next thing I want to do is launch my day. Now I'm ready to launch. Now I'm ready to dive into my day. Whether it's 7 o'clock or 7:05 or 6:55, I'm ready to rock and roll and do my day. And then I want to monitor. You want to monitor it every 60 to 90 minutes, because oftentimes these things will take a little bit less time, a little bit more time, and you can literally control it like a flow chart on a remodeling project. So the next thing I want to talk about is common mistakes. These are common mistakes that I see people with this system. The one is trying to force a 14 hours in a 10-hour day. You have a window of what that day is, so develop a plan. All you're doing is setting yourself up to be disappointed. You might be a little this, a little bit that, but do not try to force. If that brain dump adds up to 14 hours a day, I don't generally like to take things off the list. I just modify what I'm going to accomplish within that particular item. For example, if it's develop or do a plan for a particular thing, maybe in this case I'm just developing a sketch and then following on to the next day to actually fine-tune it. The next thing you want to do as a mistake is you want to make sure that your activities are a little bit more specific. That's a better way to be able to estimate if you're more specific. Doing only a 15-minute plan, this process will take you 30 minutes minimum. As I said, I usually take about 40 minutes, and the most successful folks I know out there that have either this system or another system, they'll spend, in many cases, an hour a day planning that day. So it's not a plan by spending 15 minutes. It's just a sketch. Not being in a quiet place is another common mistake. It's really got to be a time that's almost a little bit meditative in terms of your plan. Getting creative with the process. Many people want to, I'm more comfortable with technologies and doing this on my iPad. Now, you do this at least for the first 30 days with a spiral notebook. It's very simple, and you'll be successful by doing it. Another mistake is not monitoring. Monitoring it is really quite important, because you're going to find, just like that pilot, there's going to be some air traffic, or there's going to be some weather, some things that you have to adjust along the way. And then also another big mistake is just giving up on the time system too soon. So some frequently asked questions. The first one is, should I do this over the weekend? I get this out of almost all of my seminars that I do on the subject. Should I also plan over the weekend? That's really kind of a personal choice. I find that sometimes it's good to just do a little bit of a brain dump, but kind of surrender your weekend to kind of be more in the moment or what your family or other things want to do. That's really your call, but I wouldn't necessarily assume that you had to do it on the weekend. Can I use another type of notebook? Unfortunately not. 8.5 by 11 spiral notebook, you're going to find that that's where your notes will be, but that's what it needs to be, at least for the first 30 days. After that period of time, you might have another way to do it, but I certainly find that sometimes people fail because they have the wrong size notebook or it's not a spiral notebook. When should I return my emails or calls? That's a great question. It depends obviously on your role and what you do. Some people will block out maybe 2 or 3 times during the day for the purposes of emails. Now, I tend to react to the individual emails when they come in based on what they need to be, rather than necessarily block out time for that. So it's really a personal decision based on the nature of your role and the flow of those emails coming in. Another question is, can I do the planning the night before? No, you can't. You can, for those who are used to doing that to-do list the night before, go ahead on a separate piece of paper. Just allow yourself just to write down a few of those to-do list items. Have that next to you when you're doing your plan with your spiral notebook the next morning. If you try to do it the night before, I can almost guarantee that plan will be flawed during the day. What if my brain dump doesn't add up to the time allowed for the day? Well, unfortunately, some people, it doesn't. Sometimes it only adds up to, I was working with someone up in Michigan, he had 10-hour days and his brain dump only added up to 7 hours, which I find very unusual. However, when that happens, that's kind of a luxury that person, I encouraged him to start to go deeper in terms of what are those medium and longer term things that he wanted to try to accomplish. Could he, develop more time spent by doing some of the things that involve different relationships with that extra time. So it needs to add up to the time available. That window is a really important window to make sure it matches. Can I make changes to the plan during the day? Of course you can. Think of it like a football game. In the first quarter, usually the coach, makes little tweaks to the plan. If you kind of are a train wreck at halftime, then you need to make some serious adjustments mid part of the day. And then maybe, again, in the middle of the afternoon at the end of the day, you can go back and look whether you won or lost that day. But yeah, of course you can make changes to the plan. This is a fluid plan, but it all starts with having a good game plan at the beginning. What happens if my day crashes and burns? Well, this does happen. It happens with everybody. I was doing a talk in California, and I had one of the folks say, I'm really developing a very good planning system here, but driving in from work after my plan, I got a call from my daughter's school saying that my daughter was sick and I had to come pick her up. Well, that's a crash and burn day. That plan is obviously not going to happen because, beyond her control, something happens. So what I encouraged her in her case was go back, deal with what she needed to deal with in terms of taking care of her daughter, and then reestablishing a new plan that was more of a partial day rather than a full day. So what I find right now with most people who develop this system or use this system, what they're doing right now without this system, they're maybe having one day a week that is they're under control and it's kind of happening the way they want. And the other 4 days are kind of herky-jerky in terms of what happens. If you do this successfully, you're going to find 3 days a week you're going to hit it 100%. You're going to do high fives with yourself. One day you'll probably be at 80, 90%, and one of the days you'll probably fall short because of things that are beyond your control. But if you think about that as an athlete, if you get that level of improvement, you're going to save a tremendous amount of time and see a lot of success. So I want to thank everybody and certainly thank Michelle and the Surefire team and Steve that be able to bring this to you. But this stuff is really, really important. And I encourage you to, commit to yourself that you're going to improve upon this and really try to take advantage of Surefire's offer here of getting the book, reading the book, but also, really taking your game to the next level. So thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Mark. So before we wrap things up, we want to ask again if you would like a copy of Mark's book, Control Your Day Before It Controls You. The poll is now up. So if we ask that if you request this book, that you do it in a brief exchange for a conversation about your digital marketing with us. Like I said earlier, on Tuesday and Thursday of next week, if those times don't work for you, just select, please email me to pick a time, and we will pick something out that works best for you. And this is a great opportunity for you to see how partnering with a digital marketing company can make a huge improvement in your marketing efforts. So take a second here to answer up, and then we will move on to the Google Home Mini winner, which I'm sure everyone's excited for. All right, so on to the next slide. Thank you, Mark. Today's Google Home Mini winner is Rick Campbell. Congratulations, Rick. Please email marketing@surefirelocal.com with your full shipping address, and we will get that right out to you. And huge thanks to Mark again, and to all of you for taking the time out of your day to join us. We hope you learned something new, and we look forward to seeing you on future webinars. And actually, next week we have a webinar on Thursday, April 12th at 11 a.m. Eastern with our Google AdWords expert, Carrie Phipps, and she will be going over the Home Contractor's Complete Guide to Dominating Results with Google AdWords. Also, please take a minute to fill out the survey at the end and let us know how we did today and what topics you would like to hear about in the future. We love checking those out when we plan our future webinars. Thank you, and have a great day.